Hi, welcome today. My name is Carla Bowman. I'm the Adult Services Manager here at the Euclid Public Library. And thank you for joining us today. Today's program, provided by the Cleveland Association of Black Storytellers, is to celebrate Juneteenth. Juneteenth is the oldest nationally celebrated commemoration of the ending of slavery in the United States. On June 19, 1865, Union soldiers landed at Galveston, Texas, with the news that the Civil War had ended and that the enslaved were now free. This was more than 2 years after President Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation took effect on January 1st, 1863. But as Texas was the most remote of the slaveholding states, and as enforcement of the Emancipation Proclamation depended upon the presence of Union troops, the proclamation was ignored. This all changed with the ending of the Civil War and the arrival of Union troops in 1865. The first celebration of Juneteenth was the following year on June 19, 1866. Juneteenth has also been known as Jubilee Day, Freedom Day, or Emancipation Day, and has been celebrated on the local level through the years. In 1980, Juneteenth became an official state holiday in Texas through the efforts of Al Edwards, an African-American state legislator. Mr. Edwards worked to spread the observance of the holiday throughout the country, with many organizations, businesses, and communities recognizing it as a celebration of African-American freedom and achievement. Others, such as Opal Lee, who became known as the grandmother of Juneteenth, worked for years to get the holiday the recognition it deserves. And then finally, yesterday, President Biden made Juneteenth a federal holiday, which makes today the first federal observance of Juneteenth in American history. For more information about the holiday, you can visit the website juneteenth.com. So today I'm very pleased to welcome with us Cleveland Association of Black Storytellers. This is a nonprofit cultural organization dedicated to the proliferation and preservation of the African oral tradition. So I'd like to introduce our performers today. You can just wave. Michelle Rudolph, Judy Bateman, and Alarami Oliver. And Alarami is joining us from Kenya today. So we're very pleased to have you with us. So Cabs will be performing Juneteenth, Oh Freedom Over Me. So we begin.
President Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation on September 22nd, 1862, notifying the states who were in rebellion against the Union, if they did not cease their rebellion by January 1st, 1863, that he would declare their slaves forever free. The proclamations were ignored by those states that seceded from the Union. The proclamation didn't even apply to those slave-holding states that did not rebel against the Union. As a result, 800,000 enslaved Black people were unaffected by the provisions of the proclamation. It would take a civil war to enforce the proclamation and the 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution to legally ban slavery in the United States. June 19th, 1865. Union soldiers rode onto our plantation in Galveston, Texas, declaring the war was over. The war was over, and all slaves are free. Well, the enslaved Black people had been freed 2 years earlier when President Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. The Union soldiers were sent to Texas to enforce the proclamation. The enslavers in Texas deliberately withheld the news of freedom to maintain free labor. Since the soldiers rode in on Texas on the 19th day in the month of June, the newly freed Black people came up with the name Juneteenth. It is also called Jubilee Day, Freedom Day, Emancipation Day, and it's the oldest African-American holiday in the United States. the Union soldiers commanded that we put down our shovels, put down our picks, put down our brooms, our pots and pans, and leave slavery and go wherever we wanted to go. Well, the most of the enslaved Black people living on plantations had never been beyond the plantation property line. So we didn't know where to go, and we had nothing to take with us. Some of us followed the soldiers. The Union Army had seized plantations that was owned by slaveholders, and they turned them into camps. The camps were called contraband camps. The contraband camps were a temporary refuge for the newly freed Black people. All people living in the camps were required to work. My daughter and I arrived at the camp, and we were processed. And that consisted of giving our name, our age if we knew it, and the plantation from which we came. The camp was so overcrowded that the soldiers recommended that we find somewhere else to go. But for many like me, there was no other place. I was assigned to work in the laundry, and I was lucky enough to be issued a government issued tent, food, and a few items of clothing. The camp was filled with newly freed Black people from all parts of Texas looking for their brothers, sisters, mothers, fathers, children, any family members. There was a message board inside the contraband camp office to leave messages or retrieve messages. Well, there was always a line waiting for someone to read the message board. Those who could not read, the freedmen who could read, helped those who could not read. People were always very anxious to look and find family members. The contraband camp was known for the spread of typhoid and measles. So a makeshift hospital was erected to treat those who were ill. And then there was an area over in the corner, a grassy area that was school for the children. There was always a hub of activities at the contraband camps. There was freed men and their families coming and going. There was children playing, soldiers performing drills and shouting orders. There was women cooking and men planting. My brother, Solomon, had been searching for my daughter and I. And he told us later that he feared that he would never, ever find us. He later said that he was so happy that he finally came upon the one we were at, and so was I. See, my freedom didn't come with the Emancipation Proclamation. My freedom started with Juneteenth. Oh, freedom, oh, freedom, oh, freedom over me. And before I be a slave, I be buried in my grave.
When they first freed those slaves, they started calling them color people. And this day that we call Juneteenth was called Emancipation Day back then. Well, those colored people were so happy to be free. They were searching all over Texas to find a place to celebrate Juneteenth. Then along came two ministers down in Houston, Texas, who formed an organization known as the Colored People's Festival and Emancipation Association. It was through this organization that by 1872, they had collected $1,000. They took that money and made a payment on 10 acres of land down in Houston, Texas. The land started right there at Emancipation Park. They were so happy to have that land and so glad to be free, they called this piece of land Emancipation Park. That very year, they started celebrating Juneteenth. Now, food was a very important matter in Juneteenth celebrations, probably because the slaves didn't get their fair share of food. Now, barbecue reigns high. There's barbecue chicken, pork chops, ribs, and even brisket. Now, some people may say, why would they have brisket at a big celebration like this when brisket is the toughest cut of beef? because those people down in Texas know how to cook a brisket. They start cooking that brisket the night before the festival, and they cook that brisket all night long. By the time of the festival, that brisket is so tender and delicious. But then, just like any other celebration, there are people who are vegetarians. And for the vegetarians, there are collard greens and sweet potatoes. Oh, the slaves know quite a bit about those because they helped raise them on the plantation. Now, collard greens are filled with vitamin K. Vitamin K is good for clotting the blood. We all know those slaves were beat, cut, and bled a lot. Then there were the sweet potatoes filled with vitamin A, good for fighting off infections. Many times, those slaves got infections from the cuts, from the beats. But as time went on, there were other people who came to celebrate Juneteenth too. And sometimes there were people who were meat eaters, but they wanted their collard greens. So they just dropped them a ham hock into their collard greens. Takes you back to that song the slaves used to sing. Ham bone, where you been? Round the world and back again. Just meaning when those female slaves went to do work for their mistress, the mistress would give them a ham bone. They'd take that ham bone and pop it in a pot of beans or greens to give it flavor. And they passed it to every house on that plantation so they could flavor their beans or greens too. Then it was right back where it started from. There were times when the people started moving away from Texas. They wanted to relocate, get new memories. And when they left, they took their idea of Juneteenth with them. And here we are today. Every state celebrates Juneteenth. Now, in 1997, there was a man who created the Juneteenth flag, as you can see behind me. This flag has symbols that represent why Juneteenth is so important. The arch represents new horizons. The burst represents freedom. The star in the middle represents Lone Star. Juneteenth was the last state to give up slavery. And then we have the three colors, red, white, and blue, which represents every slave and their descendant was and is an American citizen. Now, whether we call it Freedom Day, Independence Day, Emancipation Day, Day of Jubilee, or Juneteenth, it's all about freedom.
So before Olarami share her final story, I'm overwhelmed with a question. I had heard after Juneteenth, formerly enslaved people organized and built schools. So this is the question that I have, and it's one that I can hardly open my mind and heart to articulate. How did they do it? How could the people who had been so constrained, so bound and chained, how could these people even imagine such places as schools? How were they able to go about the business of organizing, creating those schools? How did they even know how to do it?
Truth be told, we started schools before slavery ended. Of course, they was done in secret. I'm talking about them who could read, them that knew something of reading. Well, them taught those who couldn't. I'm talking about young and old alike. They was the teachers and they was the students too. Some learned to read better than their own masters. Quiet as it's kept. Some of the masters couldn't read a lick. I'm telling you this because I've seen it and I know it. Some of the masters couldn't read. But whether they could or whether they couldn't, it was against the law for us to learn to read. especially so after that Nat Turner rebellion. Most everywhere, teaching a slave to read was a serious high crime. So those that had a chance to read, well, they done it in secret. And those that didn't get the chance, like me, well, I guess they figured like I did. I told myself that maybe I can't read, maybe I can't write, but I knows enough to know a thief when I see one. I knows enough to recognize the one who lies, cheats, and steals when I sees her. And I can figure enough to know that when I gets up and goes out to them fields in the dawn, way wee early hours of the day, the one who calls himself master, with his lazy behind is still in the bed, waiting for somebody to come to bring him his clothes, bring him his food. And I knows enough to know that if I can ever loose myself from under this here yoke, I'm gonna need to know how to read, to write, and to work some figures. And I kept that hope. And from what I can see, so many others did too. So after Freedom Day, we kept going after it, reading and figuring. And as soon as we found somewhere to settle, schools popped up everywhere. Some had been set up by them that was freed before slavery ended. They welcomed us newly freed into their schools, knowing what we would need to learn if we were to make a life out here for ourselves. And some was set up by the Government Freedoms Bureau. Was set up for poor whites who had been misplaced after the war, and for us freed colored. Well, even some white folk who wasn't with the government came down from the north to teach. And everywhere, all over the South, wherever we settled, we started our own schools. Small communities would send for a teacher. And when they come, we paid him by housing him and taking care of his food. We took turns. Most of us old folk, we wanted to learn so we could read the Bible for ourselves. We knew that those stories we had been told wasn't the whole story. We wanted to be able to read that Bible so we would know the truth for ourselves. We wanted to read. And the teacher taught us that too. Hundreds of schools all over the South formed just like these. Some built schoolrooms from the ground up. Sometimes we was able to use an abandoned building or sometimes a church. Some was free and some charged a fee. But whatever the situation, going to school, seeing that our children was educated was as important as finding work and a place to stay and food to eat. Wherever we was, we started a school. Because even through the darkest days, we carried a hope and a prayer. A hope that they tried to bury, not knowing it was a seed that sprouted long and deep and strong roots. And a prayer from them that came before us, them that knew without ever having seen it for themselves. They carried a powerful prayer that was birthed again in us. I have it. I carries it. And you have it too. My mother prayed for me, yes, yes. She had me on her mind. She took the time to pray for me. And I'm so glad she prayed. I'm so glad she prayed. I'm so glad she prayed for me. My grandmother prayed for me, yes, yes. She had me on her mind. She took the time to pray for me. I'm so glad she prayed. I'm so glad she prayed. I'm so glad she prayed for me. My ancestors prayed for me. Yes, yes, had me on their mind. They took the time to pray for me. And I'm so glad they prayed. I'm so glad they prayed. I'm so glad they prayed for me.
Thank you. That was very nice and moving. Thank you very much. Could you tell us something about the piece that you performed today?
Yes, this piece has some narratives from the perspective of the people who was going through who were enslaved and were freed. So we researched all kind of slave narratives, and there were all kind of reactions. So we just took a few that we knew about, and also we talked about what happened after they were freed. I talked about the contraband camps. Where did they go? They had nothing. Where did they go? And Sister Ola Ramey talked about how to build after they were free, how they built schools with nothing, and that some of them all over the South sent for teachers. Teachers came and they housed the teachers and fed the teachers just to teach themselves and their children. So it shows the resilience of people, of our people. So this story is "Oh Freedom Over Me." Juneteenth, "Oh Freedom Over Me." So it shows the journey of, the last person freed in this country was 1865, 2 years after Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, and they had to do things real fast, had to learn how to read fast, had to learn how to make a living fast, had to create their life, because they had nothing. They had nothing.
Yeah. I like that you show the whole history there of how it happened and what happened. So thank you. Well, thank you very much for your presentation today, and for being part of the Euclid Library's celebration of Juneteenth on this very historic day. Do you have any future events planned for the group that you'd like to share?
Well, thank you, Carla. Yes, the Cleveland Association of Black Storytellers will be having a virtual celebration October 9th, and it is called Black Lives Matter Seize the Time, and it's going to be around a social justice theme, and we're going to be talking, we're going to be performing through song, poetry, storytelling on October 9th, and we invite everyone, and of course we'll share the information later, and it'll be on our website, exactly the exact time.
So the website is clevelandstorytellers.org. And I don't know if anyone has any questions from the audience. They can type those into the chat. But just while we're waiting on any questions, if there are any for anyone to share, I do want to mention that we have another program coming up here at the library. It's called Black Faith Communities, Our Social Justice Role in the Past, Present, and Future. This is planned for upcoming Monday, June 21st at 6:30 p.m. on Zoom and Facebook. So please join local faith leaders, Pastor Kelly Sullivan of New Life Calvary Church, Father Isidore Manishi, chaplain at St. Vincent Charity Hospital, and Assistant Imam Ivan G. Nasser of Masjid Bilal of Cleveland, as we discuss the book, The Black Church, This Is Our Story, This Is Our Song by Henry Louis Gates Jr. And it'll be focused on the current social justice issues of today. So we don't have any, I'll just check for any comments or questions from the audience. And I don't see any, but I do want to just say thank you again so much for joining us today. I was really so happy to find that the holiday has been nationally recognized, and we had a perfect timing for our celebration. So thank you very much.
Right.
Thank you for inviting us.
I had a wonderful time. Thank you for your performance.